Well, now that we've mastered the line and arc tools, we're going to take the next logical step and explore the fill tool. Now, the fill tool is simply a region that's bound. It's a closed shape, and it typically has some sort of fill or vector pattern associated with it, although you don't have to. And I really like the way that ArchiCAD manages these shapes. I think better than really any other program I've ever used, including the Adobe products. It's fluid, it works well, it's smooth, it's accurate, and I tend to use them pretty heavily, and I think you'll find yourself doing the same. So I've selected this fill tool. I held shift, turned it into the selection tool. See up here it says selected one is editable. That's on the ArchiCAD layer, which we haven't really gone into layers too deeply, but the ArchiCAD layer is always visible. Geometry method doesn't matter once it's been drawn. We can change the texture. We have the forecolor and the background color, and we can easily switch these to anything we want. The background color, one important feature here is we have the no fill and we have the screen fill. So the screen fill means that the background will take on the color of the screen, and that's generally the one you're going to want to use. And so you can see here we have the vector shape of these triangles over the top, but nothing in the background. And if we change the background color, it would just assume that same color. Whereas if it was an empty fill on a colored background, we'd end up getting probably a white. So I'll put this back to a colored background, and that's the fill is really why I have these colors, and that's just so that these visually make sense and represent whatever element you're drawing. We have a line type. You don't have to have an outline. So here's without an outline. Here's with an outline. If you do have an outline, you can change the line type and you can change the pen. So pretty simple to use. I love it. Use it all the time. We have the construction method. This is for the vector map. We can change the fill location. If we choose this option, we can actually slide the vector shapes around. We can actually change the rotation. You can distort. Don't even have to be 90 degrees. So you have a lot of control over how that works. Another great function of the fill is that it's a great way to capture areas. Sorry about that. And so here, once I turn the area on, this is the area of this fill. If I change the area of this fill, and we'll get into the details of how to manipulate these in a minute, but you can see I'm changing the size. This is updating immediately. I'm going to go ahead and turn that off. Again, we can go into the more extensive properties, but here you'll see that they're the same because there just aren't that many for a fill. One other thing to notice is you can also do image fills. I don't have any in this file, but an image fill is a bitmap image that you can use. And I'll go ahead and quickly set one up just so you can get an idea of what that looks like. I'm not going to tell you how I'm doing it. I'll just do it and give you an idea of what's possible. I'm going to choose the surface library. I'm just going to randomly grab a flooring, wooden floor, parquet. Give this some dimensions, hit OK. Try to remember what I did. That was paint 11. So I'll change this fill to, and I'm totally screwing up. Yeah, that was a surface, not a fill. So let me go ahead and do this right. We'll go to the fill. I will do new fill, flooring. image fill, hit OK. Similar process here. We'll get more into this later. We'll get into it a whole lot more. Surface, flooring, wood flooring, parquet. Now I can here's the flooring. And made it way too smaller. This box is really too big. So let me capture the properties by hitting Alt. I'll delete this guy and then I'll draw something that's of reasonable size. So we'll do 20 by 20. And I'm distorting the texture. So when I made this texture, it was just too small. This turned into be a very bad way of helping you learn to do this, but it shows you kind of what's possible. So anyway, once I get this set up, and I'll do another video that doesn't screw this up so much, but now I can do a lot with these fills. And the image is really a great visual effect for your floor plans in particular. So now that we've got this, I'll change this to just a nice solid color and teach you how to modify this. So obviously if I want to move it, it's F5. If I want to rotate it, it's F6. If I want to mirror it, it's F7. If I want to copy it, F9. So all of our basic modifiers are going to work just exactly the way we want. No tricks there. The tricks that you want to learn here are really how do we get, so I'm hitting F6, clicking this point, starting here and rolling that down. How do I change its shape? Well, a lot of this is done with the pet palette. I can move an edge in and out, just like we did with when we had the chain of lines selected. I can add a point, take a point away by selecting a point and moving it over another point. I can take an edge and make it a curve. I can make a curve straight by going back to the straight line here. I can extend the whole thing. Explicit dimension. This one's funny. It's kind of an interesting approach. What this does is it lets me pull on an edge, but it will maintain the area. So not very commonly used, but an interesting feature. So the area is remaining constant, and as one dimension is reduced or increased, the other one changes to compensate. I don't know what happens if the shape's funny. Yeah, it actually doesn't work unless it's a perfect rectangle. So you get different choices on your pet palette based on if you select, so you select the fill, then left click on the edge, then you get the palette and you select what you want. So that one just took that whole edge and just made it disappear and turned it into a triangle. I'll undo that. If you go to a node and do the same thing, I'm going to get a couple different features. One is I can move a node independently. The other one is I can do a chamfer or a fillet. And again, even once that's done, I can just click and remove these things. So the fills are great because there's very quick and smooth to modify. Now, if I want to put a hole in a shape, I have two choices. The first one is to select the shape, go to the fill tool, which is Shift L. And the reason I did Shift L, it's so like the line is two-dimensional and you Shift L, it's like well, the line is one-dimensional. You hit Shift, and then the idea is that it's a super line. It's two dimensions. It makes sense to me. Drawing inside, the real reason is F is fillet, and that one I use a lot more. If I have a fill selected, I have the fill tool selected, and I draw inside that tool, then I'm going to get a hole. So you'll see that when I select this, the hole is also selected. I can modify the hole independently, and I can also delete the hole by just selecting the hole itself. And so that works very well. I can use all of the commands that we learned before. I can split it. So I hit S, draw this line, select the side that I want to have selected when I'm done, and either I leave that piece or I can delete the piece. So the slice works very well. I do that quite a bit. The trim does not work. You can tell that terrible noise we're hearing. So basically you're going to use the pet palette, you're going to move, you're going to mirror, you're going to do that sort of thing, and then splitting. I do find myself splitting fills quite a bit. And the other two choices are doing some Boolean operations. So I can do an add, and basically I select the add tool, and then I can come up here to my geometry method, and I can kind of trace any shape I want, and it just gets engulfed and creates one fill from that. Similarly, I can do a minus, and it's just going to do a Boolean and just remove that as just like you'd expect. So fills are awesome. I use them all the time. A couple things to consider. One thing is you may do some complicated shape. I may use some lines just to lay out some geometry. I split this, and whatever I ended up doing, and then maybe I trim these guys, and then I can go to the fill tool, select my default settings, and then I can hold the space bar so I didn't change my default. So I'm going to pull these in as to my default and inject that in there. So I can take those lines and convert them to the fill with the magic wand. I can also take these lines, so I can go Shift L, make my fill, and I can hit O for offset, hit space on the edge, and then that offset operator is going to then, so it's going to trace the initial shape, and then it's going to say, okay, how far do you want to move out? And I'll say, okay, go 2 feet. And then it'll do that. So I can hit L, Control A to get rid of all those lines. And now I have these nesting shapes, one's 2 feet larger all the way around the perimeter. So that is kind of the fill tool in a nutshell. I think you will find that the fill tool is very robust and just a workhorse within ArchiCAD. And what's great is once you learn to manipulate that fill easily, you'll find that roofs and slabs are just exactly the same as a fill, but they have some three-dimensional information that will move over into your 3D modeling, but all of the techniques you're using are going to work for you without any flaws whatsoever. So that is the fill tool. Enjoy.